Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Breaking the Fourth Wall. In this installment, we are going to give you all the pig meat we can handle. It is our sausage show. First off, the biggest porker of them all, Mr. Dan Laria.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
The skin meat that links us all together, Mr. Mr. Dan Brito. Charles Brito.
Brito, okay. Charles, why did you change your name to Dan? Wait, does that mean if you're Dan, I'm Charles? That would work.
And introducing for the first time to Breaking the Fourth Wall, a good personal friend of ours that I'm meeting for the first time. Hopefully he has more healthy things in him than Scrapple, Mr. Joe. I don't remember your last name, I'm sorry.
Joe Cahill, out in California.
Joe Cahill, out of California, which sounds a lot better than Joe, I can't remember your name, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
All right, the first and foremost thing, I might as well get the bad news out of the way. I want to take a moment here to discuss last night's events in New York. I don't have all the details, unfortunately. I only caught like a little bit of it before heading into work this morning. But during the night, it seems that somebody took a pickup truck and drove it through a park, like bike trail or something of that nature, and ran over like 10 people before plowing into a school bus. Am I following this correctly?
I know he hit a school bus, but yeah, he hit a walking trail. Hit a bunch of people jogging or something. I didn't hear the rest of it. But I think only 9 people died. Well, not only, but you know what I mean.
I was about to say only. But has there been reported anything about what was possibly the motive or cause?
Well, they're saying already it's a definite. He definitely has connections to Al Qaeda, and they're already saying it's a terrorist attack. So, you know, as it was. So he lived. So they're going to be able to fix him up and then shoot him again. So they'll find out what they need to know.
Oh, good. Unfortunately, I hate starting off shows with news of death and destruction. But especially in this one, our thoughts and prayers specifically go out to the families of the victims in New York last night, especially on a night like Halloween. I mean, kids are out running around trick-or-treating, and some, I'm going to call it what it is, some asshole turns around and decides that your life's not important enough that I'm going to run you down for whatever reason.
He did this in the daytime. Because at night, yeah, he would have hit a whole bunch of kids and families and stuff. But he did it in the daytime.
Yeah, so, from all of us here in Breaking the Fourth Wall, we definitely send out our prayers and well wishes to the families through this difficult time. And I hope swift justice happens to this little piece of shit. All right.
No, slow. Listen, slow and easy. Slow and just enough to get plenty of information out of him. I hope this lasts for him for a very long time.
Just kind of goes to show, it doesn't matter what your political views are or anything else. In the end, terror is terror, and we need to unite together to stop this threat. It's plain and simple.
Absolutely.
But enough with the politics, and definitely on the bad news. I just wanted to put that out there that our thoughts and minds are with New York right now. Moving on to what this show is about, entertainment. Yesterday was Halloween, guys. Did you have a good Halloween?
Yeah. I got most of the candy. So.
You got most of the candy. What did you go? What did you go out
as?
Nobody
ever comes around my neighborhood. Nobody ever comes up around here. It's a nice neighborhood, but all the kids I think go to malls, and we also have the parks. They do big deals with Halloween, so everyone's over there. Nobody comes over here.
Okay.
So, a couple of bags of candy, and that's all mine. And I was still recovering from the weekend.
What about you, Dan? You're sitting there awfully quiet. You go out and put on your sheet with the 2 eye holes in it and trick or treat?
Well,
for years and years and years, Halloween was my favorite holiday. At my age, it still gave me an excuse to eat candy. But I just wasn't feeling it last night. I wasn't feeling well to begin with, and I just wasn't feeling it. Usually, I have all the Halloween decorations up the first of the month, and but it just never happened.
Huh. All right, well, it seems like all of us were battling that, because I myself, I mean, I did paint my face up, and I sat outside of my apartment complex to hand out candy to the very few kids that went by, and then I came in for the night and I watched horror movies. But yeah, I was the same way. I usually decorate up, and I didn't. I'm already dreading Christmas coming up, but the reason I asked this question is because, like I just said, I spent the night watching horror flicks. Kind of Halloween tradition. I assume this is pretty much what everybody does, watching scary movies or at least Halloween-esque type movies and shows during this time of year.
Stranger Things too.
Well, there you go. Well, one of the things I haven't watched any of the Stranger Things. I really need to sit down and binge both seasons, because I've heard great things about it. I just never watched it. But I specifically last night I sat down and I watched the reboots of Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street.
I'm sorry.
What's that?
I'm sorry for that.
Well, you see, normally those are I gave more credit to Friday the 13th than I did A Nightmare on Elm Street. When they initially came out, I was disgusted with them both, specifically A Nightmare on Elm Street, because I felt they totally bastardized what the franchise and what Freddy Krueger was. I mean, as much as you could bastardize a child murderer and, nightmare demon. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because last night I kind of had an epiphany, and I realized something. After a long period of not watching pretty much any horror movies, and specifically not watching the reboots or even the original sets of either of these series, I found my appreciation for them to be different. I actually found more respect for the films. And I was hoping that maybe you guys would be interested in a discussion on that, and what may have changed either my mind or may even possibly change yours on the opinion of the films.
I haven't seen that movie. I haven't seen the new one, and I haven't seen the old one since it came out. So I have little to say, except in general, there is a big difference between today's horror movies and yesterday's horror movies. There's obviously more technical ability nowadays to do the effects and such. But I don't know. Even though there are horror movies, there are kind of an innocence about them back in the day, where you could still scream at people to run, don't go in that room, or that sort of thing. And today, you pretty much don't get a chance to say anything before somebody's head gets chopped off. So, kind of
especially if it's a Joe Castro movie. Jeez.
No chance.
Somebody gets killed before the credits are over.
Hey, buddy. Oh, too late.
I mean, at least it wasn't in Scream. At least in Scream, you got the rules about don't be a virgin, and then do it for the first time when you're in a cabin in the woods or something like that.
Yeah, running up the stairs instead of out the front door.
Yeah.
Let's see what my friend wants. I don't think so. He's not that good a friend.
Yeah, and somebody mentioned last week the Geico commercial where
Oh yeah.
Instead of running to the running car, they run into the garage with all the chainsaws. that even the killer is rolling his eyes. Are you serious?
Well, the definite.
This is too easy.
Well, the definite thing is with that Geico commercial, Friday the 13th, the new Friday the 13th movie. I say new; it came out in 2009, but You know,
Oh, okay. So you're not talking about like new, just came out new.
no,
Okay.
no,
'Cause that's where you're throwing me off because I'm so old that the 1990s was only 10 years ago. So when you said new for you, I thought you meant like it just came out. I'm like, there's another one.
no,
Okay.
no. They, as far as I know, there's not even talks or plans of any more of either of those series. Although there was also supposed to be no more Saws, and Jigsaw came out this year. So
Well, because if they continue to do Friday the 13th, eventually they're going to have to move on to Saturday the 14th.
actually,
I'm just saying.
actually, a funny
Actually, there is a film.
Actually, a funny subject is the fact that Friday the 13th Part 3 is supposed to be the following day from Friday the 13th Part 2, which would technically make it Saturday the 14th.
Oh, there you go.
Little known fact.
Wasn't there a comedy horror movie or something called Saturday the 14th?
Yeah, I think there was a
There was.
parody done.
Yeah, many years ago.
Uh-oh, we're dating ourselves there.
Many years recently. Yeah, many years recently.
Yeah, I was in high school.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I especially wanted to talk about like A Nightmare on Elm Street because of the fact that the franchise itself is heavily beloved by released by the master of horror himself, the late Wes Craven, and of course starring the infamous Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, who made the character as much of an icon as Darth Vader as far as villains are concerned.
Fun fact, same birthday as I.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Are you going to become a slasher too?
Nah, too much work.
So, and through the 6 films that had progressed in the and 7 if you count Wes Craven's New Nightmare, 8 if you want to count Freddy versus Jason, which nobody really does. Robert Englund had made the character and persona of Freddy Krueger so well known with the wisecracks and the over-the-top kills. One of the questions I wanted to ask the panel is, do you feel that when they rebooted the series and casted Jackie Earle Haley as Fred Krueger and then grounded him back into more of a serious boogeyman killer who really, even though it was still Nightmare Kills, was very straightforward of slash and stab, do you think that's part of what hurt the reboot, was the fact that they deviated from what Robert Englund had established through 7, 8 films? Or do you think it was actually a good attempt at trying to take it back to the original Nightmare on Elm Street, which was before Freddy really had a personality and he did just hack and slash and was the unseen evil?
Well, for me, I didn't watch that many horror movies, but Elm Street was top of the line for me. Just the creativity of the way they did kill people, and I that was kind of missing from the new one. I don't know. Freddy Krueger for me was kind of a fun fantasy in a way, in the way that he did it. And I think the new version just didn't hold up with that. For what Freddy Krueger, I think, was known for.
Okay. Anyone else?
Joe?
Yeah, just unlike you were in the beginning, I haven't watched it since the first time and have refused to watch it since. I just didn't feel they got the flavor.
Okay, so for me, my favorite Freddy Krueger was the Dream Warriors, where they actually got to fight back. I thought that was really pretty cool. Like, they figured it out, and it was like, wait a minute, like, he's in our dreams. We can actually fight back. We can have powers too. And I thought that was a real nice way to go with it, because usually in horror flicks, you're running. Very rarely do you actually see somebody like stand up to the person, except for maybe like in Jason X when the android starts shooting him with, if memory serves correctly, her ruby guns. Although I could be confusing her with Austin Powers, but I think they did it in both, so I'm going to stand with that. But the problem I have with prequels and reboots is a prequel, you already know what's going to happen, so you have to stay within a certain framework. A reboot, you have to recapture that flavor of the original, and if you don't, you're screwed. And to be honest with you, Chris, I didn't see the movie you're talking about. Like, I didn't see the reboot of either one.
Okay.
So there's not much I could really say to that, other than, in general, I don't care for them.
That's fair enough. I'll give my opinion, and then I'll explain why I started off with that. Besides the fact that I started with a horror movie because yesterday was Halloween, this will lead into a discussion that hopefully we can all get behind and enjoy. What changed my opinion about specifically Nightmare on Elm Street? Again, I never had a problem with the reboot of Friday the 13th. To me, in a sense, it kind of did a good job of erasing things like Jason Goes to Hell or Jason X or pretty much anything after Part 4 of Friday the 13th. Did it really fit total continuity? No, but did it bring Jason back to his essentials of, you're in my woods and you don't belong here, so I'm going to kill you? Yes, it did for me. So I never had too much of an issue with the Friday the 13th reboot. But the Nightmare on Elm Street, for the longest time, from the first moment I saw the reboot, it was like, oh, this is horrible. Freddy's stiff and boring and everything else. And the characters were really, really boring. And I hated the fact that they really emphasized on Freddy being a child molester instead of a child murderer. Until I started really thinking about it, again, watching it last night, bored, alone, stuff of that nature. Excuse me. And Freddy was a child molester. It was glossed over in the 80s movies because you don't talk about it, but he was a person who liked little kitties, and then he liked to torture and kill little kitties. And that's what got him, caught by the police, and a technicality released him, and the parents burned him in his in a boiler room as a fact of vigilante justice for their children, and that's why he comes back in their dreams to take revenge on what the parents did to him. That's the synopsis of the movie. That story in the reboot did not change, although they did more emphasize the fact that Fred Krueger was a child molester. That didn't sit well with me for the longest time, but for some reason last night it started making sense to me. And in turn, the way that Jackie Earle started portraying Freddy made more sense to me. It's like, okay, you're really emphasizing his rage at this is his first attempt at being able to get revenge on these people, for what they did to him. So the rage makes sense. That's why he's not joking around. That's why he's not throwing little one-liners out. He's just going to try to frighten you enough so he's powerful enough to kill you. Makes sense. I think the story would, to me, now, before I thought the story was weak, now it's, especially with the way they push through and the nightmares are being used to force you to stay awake long enough that you wind up going into micro naps and then finally into a sleep that's a sleep-induced coma, where he could have you for all the time he wants you, was actually a pretty solid story for for Nightmare on Elm Street. So, again, my mind was changed in that when I really sat there and thought about it. I think really the only complaint I still have for that reboot was some of the the teen characters. The victims, as you will, or the main protagonist, who's supposed to be yet again Nancy, who originally was played in the 80s by Heather Langenkamp, who became, America's sweetheart through the Nightmare on Elm Street series. And in in the reboot, I think my biggest complaint is these characters are a little too millennial. They really the best way I can describe it is like they are Bella from freaking Twilight. Just no personality to them, no emotion to them. You know, just brain dead humdrum type characters. And I think that's what was missing. I think that's the element that was missing from that movie, was that from each of the kids and the victims, specifically in Nightmare on Elm Street, more so than even in Friday the 13th or any of the other type of slasher genre movies, was that the characters were pretty well realized and had personality to them. They may not have been the world's greatest actors, obviously, but you knew their roles and what they were about, and you know what their fears or whatever was that Freddy would use to exploit in their dreams, you know, and stuff of that nature. And I think they were too vanilla and too monotone of characters in the reboot, and I think that's really the secret to it not being as well received as it could have been, was that the victims were not relatable. But the reason of being that I started out with that is it got me thinking about reboots in general, whether it's TV reboots, or TV reimaginings, or movies and such. And I thought we could have a discussion on whether it's good or bad to even bother with reboots. And now I'm not talking about sequels, and I'm not necessarily talking about prequels. I'm talking about where you take a franchise or a movie series or a TV series and you reimagine it for a newer audience in some way. Examples, I know I've got a panel here of Star Trek fans. One of the best ones I can describe is like the original series versus the J.J. Abrams reboots. Or, if you will, the Kelvin timeline reboots.
Oh, the non-existent films. Okay. Gotcha.
Ouch.
Yeah, I see where you're going, and I agree. They need to stop rebooting everything. Hollywood needs to get back to creativity. You can't just keep looking to the past or remaking the same thing and ruining 99% of them. I mean, now that they're going to be doing Big Trouble in Little China, come on. That's a classic. Don't touch that.
Now, see, for me, I would have to agree for the most part, but you know, we'll get to it there for a second. First off, I do actually enjoy the J.J. Abrams if I shut my brain off and just take it for what it is. I've learned to enjoy it. I don't enjoy it as much as the original Star Trek. I do enjoy it more than Star Trek Discovery, but we'll handle that on the next show. But there are some reboots that were necessary, or at least work out better than what the original shows, movies, or whatever were be. First one that comes to mind that I think of is Spider-Man Homecoming. That took a franchise that kept falling on its ass twice and finally fixed it to being what should have been a Spider-Man idealism forever. You know what I mean? But I definitely agree with you that they need to stop with these reboots because, you know, it's only a matter of time before they start hitting classics that should never, ever be touched. Big Trouble in Little China, Star Wars, Jaws, you know, E.T. Just to name off a couple that I could think of that I think, for myself personally, you touch Star Wars, you're done. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was done when they brought out the new one.
Everybody wants to say
that was just a remake of A New Hope.
Everybody wants to say that, but so was if you want to make that argument, you can make the same argument for the Phantom Menace, and that's intentional remake because of the fact that as George Lucas has stated, the trilogies are supposed to rhyme each other. So I don't really count that as the same as reimagining or rebooting a franchise.
Yeah. Yeah,
They didn't do no over.
yeah, it wasn't a full reboot or anything. Like, it was kind of like a reimagining or a retelling, in a way, of the original three, which was fine. I actually liked them. So
Right. You know.
I like the new stuff.
Rogue One. Once I got up to Rogue One, I started enjoying them.
Yeah, Rogue One was really good.
Oh,
I think that's been my favorite so far.
the last 2 minutes with Vader in the hallway. That's all I needed. I could have gone to the theater for that last 2 minutes, and I would have walked away a happy man.
Yeah, that was terrific. That was terrific.
Best part of the film.
But yeah, but again, you know, there's so many movies out there that are considered classics. I mean, could you imagine what they would do if they tried to reboot Jaws? Part of the charm of Jaws was 3/4 of the time you didn't see the shark because it didn't work.
Yeah. Well, you know, if you really think about it, Jaws 3 was because they literally kept making the same first Jaws over and over, but worse and worse. So they always you can consider those reboots.
Let's see, if I were to consider any of the Jaws sequels a reboot, I would have to say Jaws: The Revenge. Because it really was like, let's do it the exact same way they did it in the first film, just put it in the Bahamas.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, Jaws 3, at least you had Louis Gossett Jr. and, you know, the really terrible 3D effects. The really, really terrible.
You see Spielberg sitting back there in the beginning going, maybe I should just make this 3D.
I think Spielberg's probably sitting there saying, I think I dodged a bullet.
I think so.
But, and you're right, redoing that would be the same as, say, Close Encounters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it has that innocence, that the
Hey, wasn't that remade as Mac and Me?
I mean, that's fair. But I think between Jaws and Close Encounters, or E.T. and especially E.T. and Close Encounters, I think I would be more forgiving of a reboot of Close Encounters. I think that could, story-wise, that could happen in modern day instead of the 70s as it really did. Where just the performances of Jaws or the real innocence of E.T., it really is a period of its time, you know? To me, it's almost like, okay, one could argue the Back to the Future trilogy should be rebooted because the Back to the Future 2 takes place in the future, which was, 3 years behind us now? You know, but at the same time, I think part of the charm of the Back to the Future series was the fact that this took place in 1985, and the future he went to, the unset future timeline that he went to, was really what in the 80s, what we really envisioned what 2015 would look like. We expected to have the flying cars and the Cafe 80s and Jaws 19 with a holographic shark popping out. You know, we expected those things and they never came. I mean, we're still waiting on our freaking hoverboards.
I'm waiting for Jaws 19.
Greatest line of that movie is right after the holographic shark takes a bite at Marty and disappears, and Marty stands up and looks at it and goes, "It still looks fake." Yeah, but I mean, I guess the big question is there a need sometimes for reboots or reimaginings, and when is it needed, or does it serve the better purpose?
I wouldn't say there's a need for it, but I think they need to be a bit more careful on what they choose.
Okay.
Right now, it's just find anything and reboot it. It made money back in the 80s or 90s. Let's reboot it, see if we can make money with it now. That to me is the feeling we're getting. They don't care about it. It's just Make them as fast as they can.
Yeah, I would like them to reboot bad movies. Yeah, take some of those bad movies from the 70s and 80s, and let's do something really hot with it instead of taking something really good and trying to improve on it, which they won't.
Exactly.
What's your logic there? Being if it was a bad movie to begin with, you might actually.
Oh well, anything's gonna be better, you know.
Well,
this is pretty bad. Let's try to see if we can make it better.
well, I could definitely give an example of what he's talking about. I could think of a movie like just off the top of my head here. Was based on a very popular, best-selling sci-fi book, Battlefield Earth, the year 3000.
Oh God, yes, please.
The book was phenomenal.
John Travolta should have been hung.
The book was phenomenal. The book was good enough that it actually started a cult freaking religion that people call Scientology nowadays.
By Dianetics after that book.
Yeah. You know, and stuff of that nature. It started a religion called Scientology, and then we got that piece of shit movie with John Travolta and Forrest Whitaker. It was a god awful film. But I think from reading the book, I know there's a solid story there. That is one of those movies that would do phenomenal if they actually went and redid that movie and actually stuck to the book.
The book was so good that people joined Scientology, and the movie was so bad that people left Scientology.
I guess Tom Cruise never saw the movie.
But Travolta bankrolled most of it, so I don't know what he was thinking.
Was it worth
it? It's a shame, too, because Travolta and Whitaker are actually good actors. But you can't act in pudding. So, yeah.
Well, my first reaction.
Travolta that proved it.
My first. Sorry, go ahead.
It's like Chris will understand this one. You can't wrestle on oil. Okay, it doesn't work. and that script was just I never finished reading the book because it was just so long. Mm-hmm. And here's the problem with having a degree in radio, television, and film. As soon as you take scriptwriting class and as soon as you take film critique class, it destroys your love for writing or watching films of any kind. Okay? I think the problem, since this is called breaking the fourth wall, let's peel that wall for a second, okay? And look on what we're actually talking about here. In the class, which literally broke my heart, well, one of the two, Jim Bandos, who was a professor at Temple University and had done films in Hollywood, basically said, in script writing 1 and 2, this is how you write a script. It has to have act 1, 2, and 3. The hero there has to be a protagonist and an antagonist, and things have to look bad at the end of act 2. And so basically, if you're not writing a movie script according to that formula, and there's a certain format you have to use too. The script itself has to have a format, like the actual physical script. If you don't do all of that, Hollywood won't even look at it. So the idea of thinking of fresh ideas and thinking outside of the box when it comes to Hollywood is ridiculous. It's like a liberal liking Trump and a conservative liking Clinton. It's Hollywood looking at anything that they're not absolutely convinced that it's going to make money because it made money before. No, it's not going to happen. It's a sad truth that I found out a very long time ago, and I have yet to see anything actually prove Professor wrong.
Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you a quick question. Besides being an ex-pro wrestler, so I definitely understand your wrestling terminologies. In my last band, I was a musician. In my last band, we had a saying that the guitar has 22 frets, 6 strings. There's only so many possible guitar combinations you could put into chords, riffs, and so forth, notes.
Yeah.
And Led Zeppelin has done them all. Okay? Essentially, what we were trying to say is there's nothing new under the sun. It's just rearranging what's already been done. With that being said, do you think part of the reason that Hollywood is, relying so heavily on reboots and, hey, this made money at one point, so let's make this, is because there's no new ideas under the sun?
No, I don't think that at all. Just look at your indies.
Which I'm going to be horrible here and throw out a major shout out for myself. The Steamhouse Entertainment Film Festival Independence will be in December out here in California. That was totally painless too. I felt absolutely no shame in that.
In pro wrestling, we called that a cheap pop. Or a spoment.
Oh, I got more. I could throw a lot of them out. By the way, I was recovering from this weekend, not from alcohol, from my convention. We just did our big Halloween convention in California, and I was just wiped out. So, Dan, you should have remembered that.
What, that you're doing your convention over the weekend?
Yeah, this last weekend we did it, and that's why I was still recovering on Halloween.
All right, let me explain something about Dan here a moment. You're lucky if he remembers he's on a podcast right now. You expect him to remember this past weekend?
Well, that's true, since I got a call 24 minutes before the show saying, Joe, can you be on it?
Hey, I was returning your phone call from last night. That's how I return phone calls. Do you want to be on the podcast?
Can't talk to you now. Can you talk to me on the podcast? That'll work.
Yeah, I'm real busy, man. Call me on that.
I don't have a social life. I don't do the weather. I do you want to be on the air?
Hey, you know what, though? That's got to be the most effective way to get a interview I have ever heard. I can't talk to you now. Just call me on the podcast.
It
That's the trick. I got that now.
I just keep in touch with all of the people that I actually like talking to, and I put them on the podcast.
Fan films too. I can't talk to you now. Just show up on the set at 3 o'clock tomorrow. We'll talk. Hey, hold this sign. Hey, you read this line, okay?
Hey, hold on a minute. Don't move while we mic you up.
Well, I'm gonna shift gears. I'm gonna shift gears on the show real quick here. We'll get back to the reboot and reimagining conversation here in a second here. But see, I didn't know, Joe, that you were an independent filmmaker. Why don't you take a couple minutes here and run down what you've done and what you're working on and stuff of that nature. Let's hear a little bit about you and your production company.
Oh, well, right now we've got going on is, we're about to do the blast off of a new one. It's called Shadow Squad. Going to be doing that with Philip Cable, so some of you may know him from his books. We're real excited. It's going to be a new imagining of horror stories, since the horror stories are being done normally by everybody else now. We're going to have a smart team of people.
So they know how to run outside a door.
Exactly. Hey, you know what? That thing looks like it could hurt us. Let's run. That type of thing. It's going to actually be an investigation type team. We've got, we're doing a Cal Exit documentary right now. It's kind of funny listening to the different sides and who's all where. Republicans wouldn't mind it happening. They're kind of happy if California did secede because they pretty much lock up the government forever, losing all the votes over here for the liberals. Then we have The Circuit with Manu Intiraymi. I'm an associate producer on that one. Geez, we got a lot going on. I got to get back in and tell the financial guy to tell me where we're at. Everybody's taking my money. Let's see. Oh, and we just picked up a young independent director, his project, which is Vampires from Outer Space. It's going to be a short film, probably about 35 minutes. And basically, by the time he's done, he's going to destroy Modesto, California. which is our hometown and where we're based out of. So that's not fun for me.
Wait a minute. Vampires, outer space, and kill California? I'm totally in.
Yeah, vampires, just down in Modesto, California. You know, birthplace of George Lucas.
as long as the vampires don't sparkle, that's my only demand.
Oh, you know what? There's something that could be rebooted right there.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's reboot it and do it right. You know, vampires are scary.
Wait, you want to reboot Twilight? I got the perfect way. Here's the start of the movie. Here you go. You ready? We fade in to an office. In walks the writer with the first finished draft of the script for Twilight. And the production company takes the script, looks at it, throws it into the trash, fade to black, credits.
You know, I would unzip and have a pee into the garbage can. Then fade out.
Oh, wait, yeah, I did forget the excitement, right? Throw it in the trash can, light a match, watch it go up in flames.
No.
Credits.
No, come on. Let's make a movie here. You have what's his face, a vampire at high school, and here's a love of his life comes in closer to talk to him. He goes, eats her up, kills her, just tasty. End credits.
I have a question for all of you guys. Did any of you actually see Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2?
Yes.
Dan, you remember who I was married to? I've unfortunately seen all the freaking Twilights.
Yeah, and I like how you put that because it's who I was married to at the time as well. We watched those movies.
So here's the thing. I've seen a lot of battle scenes, and I would actually have to admit that the battle scene in Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2 is actually pretty good, except for one little thing.
It was fake.
It technically never happened.
It was a freaking Who Shot JR thing.
Yeah, I was about to say, who shot JR? Bobby, why are you in the shower? Yeah.
That's it.
Well, see, that's the thing. That's the thing with the Twilight.
Oh, we just dated ourselves again, damn it.
I will qualify Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2, the battle scene, as being the best battle scene that never actually happened on film.
Yeah, and I will agree it was the best part of all my films.
The problem was you had to sit through the 3.5 hours, the 3.5 hours of the film before the battle scene to even get to that, and you had to stay awake for it.
Exactly.
Well, see, what you need to do is start watching films the way I watch films. I watch them all fast forward until I see something I find interesting, and then you gotta put it down to regular speed. And if it keeps my interest at that point, then I'll watch.
That must be great for porn, though, huh?
Not for his wife. Honey, this part's boring. I'm just going to get it over with.
That part 2 is basically, hey, people could get hurt and killed in this shit. And the other one goes, no shit, okay, let's walk away from this. All right, end movie.
I don't need to be here.
Great.
Oh, man.
Joe, I just friended you and I just saw that message. Please no calls or messages after 5 doing American pop culture.
Yeah, he didn't tell me what I was on, so I just went with as usual.
Well, you're on Breaking the Fourth Wall.
Breaking the fourth wall. Let me go edit that.
Let me give you a little.
I'll be on American.
Well, you know what? It's fine the way it is, because let me give you a little history of the Breaking the Fourth Wall franchise. Breaking the Fourth Wall was technically the non-censored adult spin-off of America's Pop Culture magazine. Dan, when he created America's Pop Culture magazine, wanted to keep his show family-friendly, which is fine, but sometimes you just get passionate about what you're talking about. And I have a very foul mouth anyway, so I, in a sense, kind of took what Dan and I were discussing doing with America's Pop Culture and said, can I do it as a podcast uncensored? and I'll call it fourth wall, and he was fine with it, and we were off and running. Later on, Dan did his thing with America's Pop Culture magazine, going with Cruising 92.1 and stuff of that nature, while Fourth Wall started gaining new panelists, and those panelists wanted to do shows or had shows, and we wind up putting it all under one umbrella company known as Realm of the Mist Entertainment, which I started to basically protect and promote all the shows that we were doing. After Dan gets done what he was doing, he goes on a hiatus with America's Pop Culture magazine a little bit. And then all of a sudden, he and I start talking, and I invited him on a couple episodes of Fourth Wall this season, which now he's a regular panelist. And now America's Pop Culture magazine is a part of the Realm of the Mist, and we also launched Talking Trek, which you're going to be doing here in a couple minutes. So really, it's kind of full circle. America's Pop Culture, saying you're on America's Pop Culture magazine is not too far from the truth because it all stemmed from each other.
It's all corrected on there now because there's no link on Facebook to America's Pop Culture magazine anymore. So there is one to breaking the fourth wall.
So yeah, you know,
you, Dan.
we all interconcede together anyway. So
Absolutely. So who's coming out in May for our next Tahoe event?
I'm all the way in Florida, so that makes it a little more difficult for me.
yeah,
Well,
'cause
I'm planning.
East Coast, I'm on the phone. I'm on here with, right?
Yeah, pretty much, right? I'm a little farther, but yeah. I am planning California next year, so I'll keep an eye on what you got planned out there.
Plan for it in May. And we'll be doing a classic Comic-Con Lake Tahoe out of Harvey's Casino up there. And it looks like we are going to push old style Comic-Con, original.
Cool.
You know, comics.
what are those?
So that's going to be an yeah, one of those Comic-Con that has comics.
Something they make movies out of.
Actually pretty good now.
Oh my God! Did anybody see
yeah,
last night's Flash?
No, missed that.
Oh,
Missed that.
anybody care about a spoiler?
Nah.
Let's do it.
They introduced Plastic Man.
Really?
They introduced Plastic Man into the Flash universe.
Okay, so that's who it was he stuck his fist in. They didn't say on the commercials.
Is that any different from Rubber Man? I don't know.
DC's. I don't know which came first, but I still call it DC's generic Mr. Fantastic, Plastic Man, like the worst character ever designed.
Well, it doesn't really stretch, though, right?
I guess the elongated man was too much to say on TV.
Yeah, or too many, censors will get a hold of that one.
Yeah, because DC is actually 3 years older than Marvel,
Right.
and it seems to me that DC always comes up with the characters first, and then Stan Lee says, "Hey, that would make a good character for Marvel," and all of a sudden there's a Marvel version. I want to say that Elongated Man is actually older than Mr. Fantastic or Plastic Man. And I can say that with a 70% surety rate because it seems like all of the characters that are in the Marvel universe have a DC original. You know, like the Flash beat the Quicksilver by 20 years.
What about Superman and Captain Marvel? They're kind of close, right?
Well, see, but Captain Marvel is actually from Fawcett. Because there was Superman, and there was a character even before Superman called the Guardian. lot of people don't know about. And when they came up with Fawcett Comics came up with Captain Marvel, DC sued and said, this is too close to our character. Now, mind you, like whoever owns the Guardian didn't say that about Superman, but we'll bypass that for a second. And DC wound up buying the rights to Captain Marvel, but got rid of the name Captain Marvel and called the actual comic Shazam, which is when Marvel comes in and says, wait a minute, there's no actual Captain Marvel and we're Marvel Comics. We need to come up with a Captain Marvel. So then they created Captain Marvel, who was Captain Marvel. And it was in green and white way before it was in red and blue. And so there's Captain Marvel Shazam. There's Captain Marvel the Kree Warrior, who is actually one of the few people that have stayed dead in either Marvel or DC Comics. There is Captain Marvel, his son, who changed his name to something else, Marvel Boy or something like that. And then there's Captain Marvel, the female, who became Captain Marvel in the original comics because the original Kree Captain Marvel saved her life, but wound up irradiating her with his, cosmic energies, which gave her her powers. Now, I don't think they're going to keep that origin in the movie, but because in order to do that, you'd have to introduce the original Captain Marvel in order to get to her. So I don't think they're going to go all that far. Although that being said, Adam Warlock is supposed to be making an appearance in the next Guardians of the Galaxy, so anything's possible.
I don't know. In the next Guardians of the Galaxy, as far as like the teases are concerned, and something that definitely deserves a reboot, you're bringing us back to our original conversation. In the first two Guardians of the Galaxies, you've seen a tease of Howard the Duck. Bring him back. Bring him back and do a proper movie. Although I do actually, guilty pleasure, enjoy the original. Bring him back.
I really do enjoy the original.
And do it right. You don't enjoy or you do?
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. Who played the female lead? Leah Thompson? Was that her name?
Yep.
Yeah.
Leah Thompson.
Yep. Okay. Just cute enough that you kind of wish you were Howard at that point.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, that duck was my hero for a hot second.
Well, speaking of
there
space,
were things implied.
well, speaking of space ducks and heroes, it is time to end Breaking the Fourth Wall. For those at RadioCastFM.com, stay tuned because up next we'll be talking Trek. The question remains, Mr. DC, in talking Trek, will we be talking Trek or shall we be continuing on Academy Earth?
No, I'm going to actually try to talk Trek this time.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll save. I'll give you the pleasure of the movie pick of the week on talking Trek. We'll go ahead and get to the point where we'll tell everybody where we can find everybody. Charles, we'll start with you. Where can they find you if they want to talk to you?
Charles Brito on Facebook, and also Picard the Pirate group, which may be changing their names again. So just follow on along. Every time I hear about a CBS lawsuit, my Star Trek parody moves farther and farther away.
I was about to say, did CBS contact you yet?
Not yet, no. So it's changing. So you hear somebody just got sued? Well, he was suing CBS first, but apparently this photographer is suing CBS for using some of his photos. They just literally stole his photos out of his website and used them. Well, this guy sued them. Well, now CBS is doing a countersuit saying that, he used some of their screenshots from an old TV show and put them on his website. So they're countersuing him for doing that. So they're now suing each other. And everybody's afraid that this is the way the companies are going to do now, because it happens all the time. Companies steal photos from photographers all the time, and they sue, and usually they settle. They pay them because they found it, and that's it. But CBS is trying to start a new trend here by suing back whoever sues them. So that's going to be interesting for anyone that gets swiped from their for their photos and stuff.
Does anybody feel like CBS has become the new evil empire?
It kind of has become the new Disney.
Yeah.
However, Disney's being just as bad. I mean, what was it I read a minute ago about Star Wars: The Last Jedi coming out this December, and Disney is now like putting in these new rules to all the theaters that they're projecting the movie on, where it like Disney is money mongering the shit out of theaters. They're demanding 65% of the ticket sales, for the movie. They demand that the Last Jedi for the first 4 weeks must be on all the biggest screens. You can't put any other movie on for the first 4 weeks that it's out except for The Last Jedi. And if you don't follow and comply with those rules, then we'll take an additional 5% out of your ticket sales.
Man. Oh, wow.
Now, take into consideration, this is not verified. It was a report that I was reading right before we started the show, so I haven't had a chance to fact check it yet. But knowing Disney and its history, it's not unreasonable to believe that they would pull something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's already been known for years that theaters take a really big hit on movies as far as ticket sales. They have to make it up by selling popcorn to you for $6.
What are you talking about? I love my $10 small soda. My $25 3-kernel popcorn.
I understand the farther you go west and north from Florida, it gets more and more expensive.
It's not that expensive. A night out for me and my girl to go see a movie costs more than my rent.
Well, where else are you going to get 2 hours of enjoyment? Never, don't answer that.
Well, it depends on where you're at. The Philippines?
Well, if you're Pee Wee Herman, you'll find it at the theater, too.
Fun.
Let's be fair. If your name's Pee Wee Herman, you'll find that fun in the theater, too.
Oh, yeah.
Again, something in Florida.
Connect the dots, la 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 la. Joe, tell everybody where they can find you if they want to talk to you.
You can find me on my website, modestoclassic.com, or as Joe Cahill all over Facebook.
And last but not least, Mr. Dan Laria.
Well, actually, you can find me if you stay on for the next show, so I'll tell you that.